Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, look at this little beauty here. This is a Tudor Oyster from the early 1950s with an absolutely beautiful patina on it, kind of all over the whole thing. You can see it's a York, which was apparently a little subset of Tudor oysters that were named after famous cities. So there you go. That's why it's called that. As you can see, this one has been well loved. It's got dirt all over the strap. I know that the owner sometimes would garden with this watch on, which I think is pretty cool. This watch belonged to his grandfather. He reached out to me because he had this watch sent into Rolex and they sent it back. They said, we're not even going to touch this thing, and they wouldn't service it. It stopped running. And as you can see, the crown isn't sitting correctly. And the owner was wondering if there was anything that we could do about that, or how bad it was that was sitting like that. And it's actually quite bad. You know, if you take a look at it, you can see here that the threading is just completely stripped on that crown tube. And that means that any elements can just get into the watch, which is probably why it stopped. He said it had been running fine for quite a while, and then it had stopped after that crown came out. We can take off the strap that he put on it here and take a look, and oh, I love this. Look at that case back. If you can't quite read it, it says, "To Norman from Mom and Dad, December 25th, 1952. And I mean, you just can't get cool history like that off of something new. This watch was on this person's wrist for years. Eventually it made it down to my client, I guess we'll say. And, you know, he values this watch. As you can see, this watch was plated as well. And really interesting, it looks like it's been replated, but the original plating was also left in place when that happened. Normally, if the plating comes off, brass turns brown when it's exposed to the elements. And as you can see, this watch still looks gold. So I believe this has been replated at some point. Now, one of the things that the owner was really, you know, wanting to keep intact here was things like patina and the wear and the character of the watch. And thankfully that lines up quite beautifully with my approach to these restorations. If you followed my channel for a while, you know that I tend to keep things on the more worn or patinaed, as we call it, side of things. Let's take a look at the movement. And there's some good news straight away. The balance wheel looks like it's intact. And even though it's not really spinning freely, at least it's not a broken balance staff, which I didn't assume that that's what it would be, given that this had run previously. But the fact that it's not running is a mystery. We don't really know why. Any number of things could have happened with that crown just sitting open like that. I mean, it lets dirt, water, dust, you know, anything in there. And so, you know, my inclination here is to start off with the way that we do a lot of the watches on this channel. We're going to strip it down, clean it completely, and reassemble it, oil it properly, and then we'll see what we have at that point. Now, we've got more work to do on this watch, though. As we take the movement out of the case here, you can see that dial. I absolutely love it. I'm not touching it. This is the type of dial that has so much character. And again, the owner, you know, wasn't interested in any type of restoration, but I don't do dial restorations anyway. Sometimes I'll clean them up a little bit or do a little bit, but I think once you start getting into the realm of like painting them or reprinting them, you're kind of, you've lost me at that point. So we'll take the hands off here with my hand levers, and that way we can start getting into the movement. But yeah, you know, could be anything, right? At this point, why the movement's not running most likely needs a service, and that's where I'm going to start from now, since there's nothing else obvious. I've got this cool little box to hold the hands. It kind of suspends them. It's called a membrane box. And that way the hands will be protected. Hey, look at that. It looks like the balance is spinning a little bit now. So there is at least some amount of give to this watch. It looks like it wants to run. What he said is that it would run for a certain period of time and then stop again. And that was kind of the symptom that he was seeing. And that can be caused by a few different things. Sometimes that's caused by teeth on a wheel being gummed up or jammed up or having dirt in them. And as it hits that part of the wheel, the movement will stop. But if you shake it or bump it or, you know, wind it or whatever, then maybe you can get past those teeth and then it'll take until those teeth come all the way back around and re-engage before the movement will stop. So that could easily be the case here as well. And as you can see, the movement's actually already stopped again. So I'm going to use my cannon pinion removal tool to remove the cannon pinion here, and that'll allow us access to the other side of the watch, which is right here. The first thing we'll do is let down the mainspring. He did say that he had wound the watch and that it just wouldn't run. And yeah, as you can see, the mainspring seems to be working just fine. And once again, we see the balance wheel attempting to start itself, but not really being able to. So this watch is in dire need of, at minimum, a service. It's a very old movement. You know, this watch was made in the early 50s. As we saw, it was gifted to the owner's grandfather in 1952. And so it's not uncommon for these to have been worked on multiple times over their lifetime, to have parts replaced. You know, one thing that stands out a little bit is the fact that the barrel bridge is not brass like the rest of the movement. That doesn't mean that it wasn't made that way, but it also could have been replaced at some point. This is the train wheel bridge. We're going to take this off first. Interestingly, this is a Tudor branded movement, but this movement, it was actually made by a mass manufacturer of the day. That is, for the most part, how the Swiss watch industry worked for a very, very long time, up until actually quite recently, is that there were specialized producers of the different parts of watches. And as a Swiss watch company, you would go to those producers to say, make the case for me, make the hands for me. I want them to this specification, this design. And one of the things was the movement. And you would actually most often just go buy an off-the-shelf movement. This one was made by what we now know as ETA, which is the most common movement manufacturer. They still make movements for a lot of watches that you probably know about to this day. And they made one for this Tudor watch. And if you don't know about Tudor, by the way, Tudor's a really interesting company. They've had a bit of a renaissance over the past 10 years or so. But they're actually a sub-brand of Rolex. Rolex owns Tudor. And particularly for the day, and it is true to this day as well, is they're kind of the slightly more affordable version, right? Where Rolex doesn't want to make a watch that costs below a certain amount because they feel that it would hurt their brand. And they felt that way back then too. So they decided to spin off a separate brand that they could sell watches that were more affordable. And this is an example of one of those. Truth of the matter is, though, they're fantastic. They are today and they were then. They have a lot of Rolex DNA in them, and you don't pay the Rolex prices. So they're a really great option if you're looking to get into, the kind of higher end watch market. Okay, barrel bridge comes off. Ooh, there's some dirt. That's not good. But barrel bridge comes off and we can take the barrel out. Most of the train of wheels already out as well. And that was a little bit stubborn. And you can see a fair bit of dirt in the movement. Nothing crazy. We've had worse on this channel, but this thing isn't exactly sparkly clean in there either. And we can continue the disassembly. I'm going to set the crown and the stem aside. We're going to need to address that shortly here because the case tube stuck to the crown. So we'll talk about that when we get to that point. For now, we can continue disassembling the movement. If this is your first time going on this journey with me, first I want to say welcome. I'm really glad you're here. And if you're kind of questioning, like, why am I watching a thing about wristwatches? I don't even have one, or I don't like them, or whatever. This is one of the really kind of charming things about them, is that they are actually meant to be completely disassembled when they're serviced and cleaned. And that's something that we just don't do. These days, that's not common practice for any type of electronics or really anything that you buy, is that, it is meant to be completely disassembled. But, in a normal watch movement like this, like there's no glue, right? There's no like adhesive or tapes or something like that that is meant to sort of semi-permanently hold something in place. It's all friction via screws and bridges and things like that. And that means you can take them all apart. You can put them back together. And I got to tell you, there's something really special about that, about the process and about the feeling that you get when it goes back together and about the feeling that you get when you kind of go through each and every bit of it. I don't know what it is, but it's something that feels rewarding. It has a real kind of satisfaction at the end of that process. And well, that's what we're going to do today. I'm really, really hoping to be able to get this watch back on the wrist of the customer as well, because this is an extremely sentimental watch for the customer. The owner of this watch was like, really bummed. I mean, he was willing to pay, whatever it took to get the service done via Rolex even. And they just turned him down. They just said, nope, we're not going to touch it. I think it was just too old. Like they probably just figured they couldn't get parts or something. But I have to say it is a little bit intimidating when a watch ends up on your bench that Rolex said no to. But it's actually more common than you'd think for that to happen. Full-time professional watchmakers or watchmaking, workshops like that, they work under a different set of parameters than I do, right? Like I'm interested in the history of it. I'm interested in trying to help somebody get a watch back on their wrist that they can wear, pass down to their children or whatever. But those places are much more interested in the bottom line. And I get it. Look, if this isn't my full-time job. This is something I do out of passion because I love doing it. So I can take the luxury of taking a bit more time and looking around for parts and stuff than they can. But still, it's like when Rolex says no and I'm like, sure, I'll give it a shot. It's going to be, could be a bumpy road for me. At any rate, we've almost got the entire movement taken apart, and so far so good. No obviously broken parts, nothing that was like, whoa, horrible. Again, there was some dirt in the movement. You could tell it's in dire need of a service. It probably had some moisture ingress in there, but no big rust or anything like that. So to be honest with you, I'm like feeling pretty good about that part. We'll take the crystal out here. Pretty sure that this is just going to be replaced. Yeah, it's slightly discolored and it has some scratches on it. So I'll probably just go ahead and replace it. Crystals actually aren't that expensive and it's fairly easy to replace them. Okay, so taking a look at the crown, we've got a major issue here. So this part right here, that's actually meant to be in the case of the watch. Those outer screws are supposed to thread into the case of the watch, and then the crown actually threads around that tube. And as you can see, it's come away completely. The inner threads here on the case are stripped. And by the way, that's a Rolex crown. So just to show you how close these brands were, they actually used crowns from Rolex on some of these models, and that's one of these ones as well. We'll also be replacing some of the gaskets. An Oyster watch, in this case, Rolex makes watches that are labeled as Oyster, and so did Tudor. That's a reference to waterproofness. And sometimes the gaskets can go, and we really want those to be new as well. So what I'm going to use is what we call a pin vise here, and I'm going to try to cinch that down around the case tube, which is stuck in the crown, because I need to be able to get it out. So let's see if I can just by hand. There we go. No problem. So now the crown comes out properly and it leaves the case tube in the pin vise. So I've at least separated those. I was a little worried that they could be stuck together, but they weren't too bad. So that's great. And there you can see it. And if you look closely, you can see some of the threading. It looks a little bit damaged here as well. So that could be part of the problem, but that outer thread threads into the crown and then the inner thread threads into the case. So like, for example, that's supposed to screw in, but look, it's completely loose and it doesn't hold at all. So that means the threading on one or both has been compromised or is just gone. And that's going to be a major issue. And we're going to have to tackle that because we can't hand this watch back to the customer without having that sorted out. So now all the parts, especially the little baby ones here, go into these mesh baskets. And these mesh baskets will allow me to put these parts into a bigger mesh basket, which will go into the watch cleaning machine, which subjects the parts of the watch to basically a 3-stage cleaning process with cleaners and rinses to completely take away any old oil, dirt, dust, grime, anything that's left in the movement. So we'll set that aside, but let's take a look at this case now, because we do need to prepare it as well for cleaning. And as you can see, this watch is well worn by the owner. He definitely wears it when he's out and about and doing things, which I totally respect. I think that's awesome. I think these watches are meant to be worn, but as you can see, there's some buildup of dirt and grime here. So I'm just going to knock off kind of the majority of it here before I put the case in the ultrasonic cleaner. Also, it looks like some dirt got in this case tube hole as well. So I'm just going to use some pegwood to kind of knock out that. There may also be the remnants of some type of glue or something. The owner mentioned that that this threading situation had happened before, and that a watchmaker had used some type of glue to put it in place. That's not normally the first option, but that's the option that this watchmaker took, and there may be some remnants of that as well. So let's first start off with the watch cleaning machine. Again, this is going to be a cleaning and then double rinse and then a drying cycle here as well. And while I do this, I did want to thank my patrons. I have a Patreon for this channel. If you like what I'm doing here and you'd like to support me, there's a link in the show notes, and it's called patreon.com/wristwatchrevival. And it's cool. You get to go over there. You can support the creators that you love. And it's a really great way to show that you love, what I'm doing or what even whoever else is doing. And you get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail. No matter what level you sign up at. And you can even get some sneak peeks of videos and some of the content that I have coming up on the channel that's available only over there. And again, thank you to everybody who supports me on the Patreon. I really, really appreciate it. Okay, now we can also put the various parts into the ultrasonic cleaner. This is a special type of cleaner that you just put a basic detergent in, but it sends literally ultrasonic waves through the water and the detergent, and that can help non-abrasively clean things extremely well. It's kind of loud. It's kind of an obnoxious thing, but it does such a great job where you don't have to use, sanding or scraping or anything like that for, things that you want to keep in the exact condition that they were in, just cleaner. And I'm going to use this little basket to clean the crown as well, because there was definitely some dirt in there, as well as the crown tube. And here's the parts all laid out after they've been fully cleaned in the watch cleaning machine. As you can see, they cleaned up beautifully. That's an entire watch movement, everything you need to make the watch work, all laid out in front of you there. And it's beautiful. Now, taking a look at this case, as you can see, there is still some threading happening there, but it does look pretty knocked down. So the first attempt I'm going to do is using what we call a tap. So this is threaded to the exact same size as that tube that needs to go in. And what can happen is sometimes the threads on the inside of a threaded tube like this can get flattened or pushed down. And if you use the tap to sort of put it in again like this, what it can do is it can kind of refresh those threads. It can enliven them. It can make them a little bit taller and a little bit more aligned. And if it's close, right? Like if it's just been like kind of knocked down, this can actually make it so that you can get some bite on that thread again and then be able to go for it. So this is the first stop. So you can see we did bring back those threads a little bit. So maybe there's some hope here. Let's see what happens. I'll use a little bit of Rodico, which is kind of like watchmaker silly putty. It clears away, it's just sticky stuff. And let's see what happens. Shoot. Yeah, so this isn't what I wanted to see. So as you can see, this tube doesn't thread in at all. It still just sticks in with no resistance, meaning that even though we did get those threads, it's not enough. So going over our options, this is what I came up with. So we could send this out to some type of laser welder that could build up material and then we can rethread it. The problem is the heat from that can damage the plating, and the owner was very sure that he did not want the watch to be replated. And that limits our options a bit. And I'm going to use an old trick that I know from my days of working on cars. And this is an epoxy, but it's a special epoxy that actually, you can see how it's gray. That's because it actually has metal, tiny bits of metal shaved into it, basically. So that when this epoxy sets up, it actually sets up like a metal. It's not exactly a metal, but it actually does set up quite a bit like a metal. Even in fairly high pressure, high heat environments, like in an automobile engine, this stuff can hold up for quite a long time. And I'm going to give it a shot here because this is not a high pressure, high heat environment. And if this sets up the way it does in an automobile engine, it'll hold this crown for a really, really long time. And it gives me a heat-free way to take a shot at getting this crown tube back in place where I can maintain the integrity of the rest of the case. So I'm going to carefully put this crown tube in after, again, carefully placing the epoxy into the hole. There we go. And like with most things, it's very tricky. You don't want too much because then it can get in the way and screw up, a lot. But if you use too little, it won't hold up for very long. So I'm going to use an old oiler, which is just like a little metal stick, to remove any excess epoxy that I had gotten, anywhere. And I'm even going to use a swab here to just carefully remove any leftovers that might be on the case or anywhere else that you could actually see. The epoxy down near the base of the tube is fine because, as long as there's not too much, because the crown covers that anyway. So even if it's like a little darker color, you won't be able to see it. But anything that's on the case or in that tube could be problematic. And so I'm going to be very careful to kind of reduce the amount of epoxy that I've used here. And to let it set, I'm going to use some tape to hold that crown firmly in place so that it sits exactly flush with the case and so that it can't set up a little bit crooked, because that would be a problem as well. Okay, so we'll let that dry. And when I come back to it, we can remove the tape and let's take a look and see how it did. I don't really know how to test this other than putting the crown on and kind of jamming around with it and seeing if I can feel, but it looks good. It dried up exactly the way that I hoped it would. It's flush with the case and it looks like it got a nice seal there. Let's just do a test fit here and see if the crown will fit. Hey, it does. Okay. I'm going to call that a done deal. This is the type of thing that's a little bit experimental for me because it would take a number of years to actually find out. But I think we're going to call that job done. That's waterproof. That is going to keep that seal. And as long as it maintains its integrity, we're good to go. So that means we can start turning our attention now back to the movement. And this means that we're going to do just a normal reassembly on the movement. And we're going to take a look at it as we go. If we need to troubleshoot, we do. If it fires back up, hallelujah. And we're going to start off by putting the mainspring back into the mainspring barrel. We use a special tool called mainspring winders for this. And this is a very, very specialized tool, but this allows us to get that mainspring back in the barrel safely without bending it or getting little bits of gloves or touching it with your fingers, which is kind of a no-no. So this is really the only tool for the job. And unfortunately, it's quite an expensive tool. But, when you start going down the rabbit hole of this hobby, you start realizing that it is not a cheap hobby. It is very rewarding and it's awesome, but you do have to invest quite a bit. The good news is, at least when it comes to, hold on. Wait for it. Oh, I love that noise. It's so good. There's a lot of little moments that you get doing the hobby, but that's one of my favorites. But what you also realize, I was going to say with the tools, is that they're not a total loss. Like if you invest a good amount in some tools and find that the hobby isn't for you, or that you move on or whatever, these aren't the type of tools that, go from being worth $800 to being worth $50 at a flea market. Like you can put these things up on eBay and get a good chunk of your money back and at least not feel like you got fleeced on it, so that's gives you a little bit of, relief there. Okay, so I'm going to use this little tool to push the barrel lid back on safely, just like that. And hey, that tool is only a few bucks, so there you go. Now we can continue with the reassembly of the movement itself. We'll start with the train of wheels. This is the center wheel that goes in first. Movement looks absolutely spotless now. I love that. Now the escape wheel will go into place. It's a little difficult to get these to sit in the pivot sometimes, and it requires some real patience and some deft work with the tweezers, but you'll get there. Now there's kind of an intermediate bridge here that sits over the center wheel, so we'll install that first. And now I can put the barrel back into place as well. And this is one of those kind of gotcha parts. This is the setting lever screw. This one actually cares about the other side of the movement. So you don't actually do much with this on this side as far as reassembly goes, but there's a tricky part. The barrel bridge goes over that screw. So if you forget to put that screw in place, and remember, it's not holding anything in place right now at all, it's just sitting there, then you have to undo everything to take the barrel off. And if you're new to the hobby, you're going to do that. I did it a couple of times before finally going, okay. I gotta remember to put that setting lever screw in place. Okay, so now I've got the third wheel and the fourth wheel in place, and I can put on the train wheel bridge. Hey, there we go. Once the pivots line up, when you turn the barrel, it should spin the rest of the wheels fairly freely, so that's good. And I'll go ahead and put on the barrel bridge here as well. Like so. And now we can screw everything down. Like that. One more quick check. Yeah, beautiful. Everything's spinning, so that's nice. You can see I've got a little bit of oil to put in here. This goes around the edge of where the barrel arbor meets the barrel bridge. It moves very slowly, but it is a friction point. Now I can put the click spring in. I've never worked on this particular movement before, but this one shares the characteristics with most of the movements that I've worked on, so there's no big mysteries here for me. That feels really good, I have to say. One of the things about doing this hobby the way that I do it, where I want to share it with you, is that it means I get to work on a whole lot of different movements, which carries with it awesome. I mean, I'm a kind of a generally curious person, and I like new stuff like that, so that's cool. And I get to learn a lot. But I don't get that satisfaction that you get when you know something really well. You know, if you've ever worked on cars and you know a certain type of car, a certain type of engine for a car super well, or if you work on computers all day, right? And there's that one program, you know, you're just a wizard in Excel, or, you know, I feel that way about the video editor program I use, for example, right? Where you're kind of in your comfort zone. I'm mostly not in my comfort zone when I'm working on the watches because they're kind of always all new to me. But this is the type of watch that, even though I haven't worked on this specific one, I've worked on enough that are like this to now go, I know there's no real gotchas for me on this. And that feels really good. Putting on the crown wheel now. We've already got the ratchet wheel in place as well as the click. Reminder, reverse threaded screw here. It feels very, very weird to turn the screw leftwards and have it screw down, but that's how that works. Now we can reinstall the cannon pinion. Click, it just goes down like that. And now we can work on the keyless works. The keyless works, of course, is the part of the watch that controls the winding, and it also controls the setting of the hands. And the keyless works is basically the thing that lets you choose between the two. You know, if you've ever had a mechanical watch, when you turn the crown, it winds the watch. And then most of them, you pull it out a notch, and then you turn it and it turns the hands. This is the system that lets you go from one to the other. I'm using medium viscosity oil here. If you see that red oil, that's medium. Blue is high viscosity, it's like a grease, that one right there. And then if it looks pretty much clear, that's the lightest viscosity oil that we use in these watches. These are all synthetic oils. They actually used to use, kind of animal product, based ones. But for quite a while now, they've had full synthetics available that last quite a bit longer. Okay, the stickiest part here of the keyless works is the yoke spring. It's very heavy spring, and you have to be very careful. And if you look closely, you can see the yoke has actually come out of the sliding clutch, and I'm going to have to, there. Okay. So that's the danger zone. That's where that spring can fly. You can see how loaded up it is, and I'd love to get the rest of this in place quickly so that I don't lose that stupid spring. I'll put the setting lever in place here, screw it down, and now I can put the setting lever spring in place. And what this does is it applies pressure to the setting lever so that when you pull that crown out, remember how we just talked about that? That's what makes the click happen, where it goes from one to the next. And we can even give that a test here once we get the crown and stem into place. A little bit of grease here on certain parts of the stem, and we can put it back into the movement. Like that. And once it's in place, we can give it a test. That actually doesn't look right. So yes, it is going back and forth, but that spring just isn't really applying any pressure to the setting lever. And so there's no click. It's just sort of soft. So what I'm going to do is actually just try to reposition the spring here and just try to bump it over a little. What the? So I actually just put the plastic stick on top of the setting lever spring and it broke. Like the spring part just snapped off. Wow, I have never had that happen before. It makes sense to me though. So my conclusion here is that spring was fully fatigued, which is why it wasn't applying any pressure to the setting lever and why it snapped under almost minimal pressure from that plastic stick I have. I mean, you on a new setting lever spring, you probably couldn't break it like that. And that thing broke under just like tiny pressure. So I'm going to say that was probably the original setting lever spring for this movement. It is a wear piece. It also is right next to the crown hole there where it was opened up to the elements, and it may have just been fatigued as a result of that. So the good news is the watch still functions without it. It's just you do need it before we're done. So I'm going to order a new one, but we can continue with our rebuild here. So now we've got the pallet fork in, and this is the moment of truth. This is where we put the balance in and see if we can't get this watch running again. Okay. Okay. Run, please. Oh, we have life. We have a very small amount of life. Wow. Yeah, so it actually stopped again. So it is running technically, but that is extremely low amplitude. Like, amplitude is a way to measure the power that's going through the watch. And as you can see, that it's barely running, like really barely, like it might just stop it at any moment. I'll try putting a little bit more wine in the watch because sometimes that can help kick it up, but it's not doing anything. In fact, it just stopped again. Yeah, there's something going on with this thing and it's not running enough. Let's put it on the microscope and see if we can't investigate. All right, I believe I found the problem. So this is the hole where the barrel goes in and it has lengthened. It's an oval shape now. And what that means is that everything can move around and it can actually touch the wheels, and that slows down the whole watch. So I'm going to do, again, the owner of this watch wanted to keep everything as original as possible. So I could replace that, or I can do this. And this is a technique that I've done before on the channel. And basically what I'm going to do is very, very, very slightly shrink that hole down with my tool here. And then I'll open the tool back up. I'll open the hole back up a little bit to just the right size. So here we go. I'm going to use my staking set here and a small hammer. Once the plate is right in between those two stakes, I can just give it a little tap turn it a little more, another turn, and a few more taps. That's it. And what I can do is that hole is now smaller. And as you can see, when I put it on top of the barrel here, it won't actually sit on it because I've shrunk that hole by just a tiny, tiny bit. And this is a technique that you can use to shore up this problem, but also keep the original part. There's another technique that you can do as well that I am learning how to do, and it uses a watchmaker's lathe, which I have recently purchased, but it is outside of my skill set, and there's no way I'm going to practice that type of thing on somebody's important watch. So I'm going to use the technique that I actually know. And this is what we call a smoothing broach. And this is just a special tool that you can use. It gradually gets bigger as you use it. And what that does is it lets you open up that hole in that bridge just to the right amount. Let's put it back on the microscope and see if it fits now. There we go. See, now it fits perfectly in there. You want a little tiny bit of space. I might need to open this up slightly more, but that looks pretty close to me. And that way we don't have that barrel flopping around and potentially touching the other wheels. So let's put the barrel back in. And now we can put this bridge back on as well. And we'll see if this can solve the problem and get the watch running a little better. And taking a quick look on the microscope again, and there we go. See, a tiny bit of play is okay, but we had way, way, way too much before. So now, once again, we can give this thing a shot. It's also worth noting that, this watch has not been fully lubricated yet. So, we will hopefully get some gains from that as well. Let's see if we can get it to run again, though. Doesn't look like it wants to. Oh, okay, it's kicking up a little bit. It still looks pretty low amplitude, but maybe a bit of an improvement here. To me, this is the type of thing where it could stop the watch or it could be completely out of the way, the barrel, depending on where it's going to sit. So let's move forward here and get this watch lubricated properly, and then we'll see how it's running. You can see it's already starting to run a little bit better. But I have high hopes for this watch. I mean, these movements were very well made. So a little bit of oil, and now we can tackle the upper shock setting here, which is a little bit tricky, but we can actually just take it all out at once. There's actually 3 parts there that I took out: the upper spring, the cap jewel, and the setting. I'm going to immerse these in a solvent, and this is going to strip away any dirt, debris, and most importantly, dried up oil that could be left over on it. And now I can take the cap jewel and actually apply a very small drop of oil to it, like this. There we go, right in the middle. And now I can replace the setting. And when I turn it over, I can center the jewel, and then I can put this jewel back into place on the movement. And what it'll do is it'll basically suspend a drop of oil right where that pivot is, and that's exactly where you want it. You can see the jewel actually has a little bit of markings or something on it, but it is clean on the inside. And now I can replace this shock setting as well. And there's one more jewel left to oil after I do the bottom. But most importantly, take a look at it now. Now this watch is humming right along. That's the type of amplitude that we wanted to see. So I'm really happy to see that this watch has sprung back to life. This cap jewel also was oiled, cleaned and oiled, and now it'll be put back into place as well. Okay. So now that we've got it done, we can put this thing on the time grapher and see how it does. The rate is the most important thing. That's what I wanted to see. 275, 278 for the amplitude. Fantastic. Acceptable beat error. And the rate's pretty good too. So there's the broken part. And I finally got the new one, so we can install that and finish this restoration now. So that's the setting lever spring that broke. And we'll just go ahead and install the new one. Just like that. And we'll tighten it down and we'll give it a test as well. There, that's what we want. See how that spring's pushing up against that part that's sliding back and forth? That's the pressure that this spring is supposed to have when it's not fatigued. You know, sometimes metal, after it gets worked that much, will basically fail. It basically gets a whole bunch of little tiny, micro fractures on it and then eventually breaks. All right, so the last few things that we need to do here. First, we'll work on some of the gaskets. So this one actually goes on the inside of the crown tube. So this is kind of on the entry to the watch, and this is part of what makes it what they used to call waterproof. That term is under regulation now. So water resistant is the words that they use. And as you can see, it just sits right inside of that new tube. And by the way, that is a new case tube as well. I did pick up a new case tube for this, the one that I epoxied in. The other thing we need to do is we need to replace the crystal. And as I mentioned before, replacing a crystal is actually fairly straightforward, assuming you have one of these nice little tools called a rover press. There's also a couple of other ways to do it, but this to me is the best way. And basically, we're just going to take the brand new crystal. You measure it, you order it, you pick how high you want the dome to be or what the setting looks like. And then it's really simple. You put it in, and then it just takes this aluminum die on the top, pushes around the outward edges of it against a bottom post that I've put in here. And that just simply bends that crystal down because it's acrylic, so it's a form of plastic. And once I bend it down enough, watch this. Whoop, just like that. Did you see it? Now it's sitting in the groove of the case, and I can simply undo the top of the tool, and then the crystal expands to fit into place. And it's quite tight too. And look at that. This case is held up very, very well. The replating job that whoever did, you can tell that it's a different color, but at a glance, you really can't, and it looks pretty good. So speaking of gaskets, there's more. This one's for the case back. Similar stuff, right? And what I'm doing here is using silicone grease, and this will make the gasket a little bit more waterproof because it adds kind of like a liquid layer to it, but also it makes the gasket more supple and less likely to break down. This is a brand new gasket as well. I always try to replace these whenever I can because they can help with keeping the water out, and that's really important on vintage watches. Look, you probably shouldn't take these things swimming down in the bottom of the pool, right? These watches have a lot of wear, a lot of time under their belt, and they probably aren't going to hold up under that. But gardening, walking in the rain, washing your hands, that stuff should be fair game, and that's what I'm trying to protect against here. All right, dial goes on, and oh my God, I love that dial. It's so beautiful. I know some people don't like it when the dial patina is like that, but I am not one of those people. I absolutely love it. Okay, and that means that we can replace the hands, and we're almost finished with this watch. This one's been quite a journey, a lot of research to figure out the best option on that case tube problem. Look, you want to get this thing back on the owner's wrist and that they can wear it, but also you're working under a set of constraints, right? Like keeping these watches original is a big deal, and busting out a welder on a brass gold-plated, case is risky business to say the least. It might not even be possible. And I certainly don't have a laser welder, I'll tell you that. I'm actually quite happy to have come up with a solution that seems to have worked well, even if it was a little bit different than I would normally approach it. Okay, so now we can put the minutes hand on, make sure that everything looks aligned, and then gently press it into place. Again, you want to just test in between to make sure that the hands aren't touching up against each other or anything like that. Now we can put the seconds hand on. Just like so. And it looks like the watch is still running nicely here. Keeping really good time too. They did know how to make these things back in the day, I'll tell you that. Now we can put the movement back in the case, make sure that everything's lined up. And as you can see, by the way, that movement's still just humming along beautifully. It makes me smile. It really does. And now we can replace the the winding crown, winding stem, crown, etc. And we'll screw that down. That's what gives it some of that waterproofness as well. There are a couple of case clamps here as well. These keep the movement secure within the case so that it isn't rattling around. And with that finished up, we can put this beautiful old case back on with that custom engraving on it. What an awesome family heirloom, huh? And take a look at this. Oh, man, this thing is so sweet. Look at that watch. This is everything I love about vintage watches right here. Absolutely beautiful. We've got it running really well. Replaced a few parts, made a few modifications, but got the job done there. Made it as water resistant as we probably can so that, you know, I told the owner that my goal was to get this so that he could wear it every day again, right? I wanted it to be like this was an everyday, you don't have to completely baby this. Again, you don't want to be crazy, but, and look at this. I picked a new strap for it as well, and stunning. Absolutely gorgeous piece. I love this watch. And let's just say the owner was very, very happy to receive it as well. Thank you so much for joining me for this journey. I love it that you spend some time with me as I kind of work my way through this awesome hobby. And hopefully you had some fun and learned something along the way. I do have an Instagram for this, for Wristwatch Revival. It's wristwatch_revival. If you happen to be over there and you want to check out what I'm up to over there, you can feel free to follow. And with that, I just wanted to say thanks again, and we'll see you next time.